Thanks to everyone for being here this afternoon, and we're here because we understand the serious implications of last week's fire at the PES Refinery. I'm extremely grateful for the stellar work of various city agencies, including the Philadelphia Fire Department, the Office of Emergency Management, and the Philadelphia Police Department in assisting PES crews with an effective response. They are part of the reason why there fortunately were no major injuries. As of Saturday, the fire was extinguished, the gas valve fueling the fire was shut off, and the tank involved with the explosion has been isolated. Philadelphia, the fire department's hazmat unit and the city's Department of Public Health continues to monitor the air quality around the refinery. There are no findings that would suggest a threat to public health as a result of the fire. And Dr. Caroline Johnson, Deputy Health Commissioner with the city's Department of Public Health, is here to expound on that a bit more. An investigation into the cause and origin of the fire is currently underway by agencies including OSHA, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, who is also present here today, the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board, and the Philadelphia Fire Department's Fire Marshal's Office. Our Fire Commissioner and OEM Director, Adam Teal, will share more about what's to come with this interagency investigation, and I want to thank these federal agencies for their expertise and for their ongoing partnership. Those who live and work in close proximity to the refinery and all Philadelphians have our word. We are firmly committed to ensuring the safe operation of this refinery and the safety of those in its vicinity. I do not believe that there is room for improvement. I do believe that there is room for improvement, both in the operation of the refinery and in the communications to residents. That's why last Friday I asked Managing Director Brian Abernathy and Commissioner Teal to convene a working group with the leadership of PES as well as members of the Community Advisory Panel, United Steelworkers, Philadelphia Building Trades, and other experts to fully explore all of our concerns. Brian will share more background on the plans of that group shortly, and at this time I'd like to invite Dr. Johnson to share the update on the air monitoring. Thank you.
Good afternoon. When an event like this occurs, our primary concern is always the well-being and health of our public, and I want to reaffirm what the mayor just said, and that there is no threat to the public health in the surrounding community. We've been monitoring very carefully, and so we have a good idea that there is no threat. One of the things that we also monitor are emergency room visits across the city, and we're not seeing any increase in citizens presenting with complaints of respiratory distress or anything that might do with smoke or fire. So we're not seeing any health effects in the public. To be more specific, our Air Management Services Division of the Health Department is charged with assuring the quality of air and the healthfulness of air in the city, and they have been doing very aggressive monitoring. They've been doing daily inspections in the community and along the fence line of the of PES. To look for hydrogen sulfide, hydrocarbons, and carbon monoxide. These are all outputs from fires and from gas leaks and from fuel burning. So we wanted to detect to see if there were any of these things escaping beyond the perimeter of the plant. And all of those have been completely negative. There's been no detection beyond the fence line of any of those compounds. In addition to this community-based sampling, we've been doing air collection, where we actually do exactly what it sounds like. We put air within a canister, and we run that air to sample for 61 different chemical compounds of concern. And on Friday, there were two very minor elevations of two chemicals, one called acetone, one called ethanol, which is basically alcohol. They were minor elevations below 1% of a standard that's been set. But since that time, we've had no detections of any chemicals or compounds in our air sampling. In addition, in case anyone was going to ask, the hydrogen fluoride has been tested and is not present either. So based on an aggressive sampling of air quality in the region of PES, we found nothing of concern, and we see no evidence that there's been a health impact on the public in Philadelphia. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. We would like to bring up next the Fire Commissioner and OEM Director, Adam Teal.
Good afternoon. I would echo everything you heard the mayor say about the incredible team effort on this incident From the very moment that we learned about it and were dispatched, our firefighters, our medics, our chiefs, our OEM staff, all of our response partners, and there are many, truly just did an amazing job with an incident that very obviously was complex and dynamic from the outset and remains so. Where we are now at day 5, we are still in a unified command with the fire department and PES. We are proceeding down parallel tracks, really 3 tracks. The first one of those is ensuring that we understand everything that's happening in the damaged unit so that we can formally place the incident under control. As you can imagine, with an incident of this magnitude, there are still some uncertainties, but they're very minor and marginal. That said, our interest in public safety is what's ensuring that we're taking a very cautious approach in putting this incident under control. Again, our firefighters and all of our partners did an amazing job to stabilize the incident and get it down to the area it's in now, which is truly just limited to the unit that was involved, which is entirely on PES's property. Again, you heard we are not seeing any other effects in the community, but we still have a pretty large operational footprint down there in the fire department. Our hazmat task force is down there 24/7, 365. We have fire marshals, chief officers, our command post from OEM, some logistics elements down there, and a couple of fire companies and paramedic units to not just support our staff, but also support the investigation resources that are either on site or still to arrive. So that first path is really still operational. The second path is the investigation. The investigation kicked off yesterday morning at PES, at their facility. I can say PES has been very cooperative in providing the information that we need to start the investigation and do that safely. So we had all the agencies you heard mentioned there yesterday. We're meeting twice a day with all those agencies to ensure that we're all synchronized around the investigation. The investigation is being performed, again, you heard a lot of agencies, but first and foremost, the Fire Department Fire Marshal's Office, the Police Department of Philadelphia, and our partners with ATF. And that's not unusual. We are fortunate in this area that we have a relationship with ATF and PPD that is matchless from anything I've seen across the country. Our investigators work side by side every day, every night, 24/7, 365. Those relationships, that familiarity, that competence, these are the most experienced fire investigators in the nation. And they are assisted by experts, explosion experts that we have here in the city. So these are the folks where other people come to learn. You know, these are the teachers for the rest of the nation. We're very fortunate to have those resources. We also have CSB, OSHA, DEP, other agencies involved to help ensure the safety of the investigation and also to look at the various facets that they have. CSB is around chemical processes. OSHA, as you can imagine, is around workplace safety. Our primary focus with the investigation now is to understand the cause and origin of this incident. It is going to take quite some time to get to that point, and that should be obvious again from what everybody's seen. So we're very happy to have the assistance from ATF and all of our other partners. And the third track is really one that the managing director is going to talk about, which is understanding the future and talking about the working group. So I'll defer to the managing director for that.
Before we get to Brian, I'd like to invite up Theron Jackson, who's the Assistant Special Agent in charge from ATF Philadelphia.
Good afternoon. ATF special agents and task force officers responded to the scene alongside our partners at the request of the Philadelphia Fire Marshal's Office to assist with the investigation. Our work thus far has consisted of interviews with bystanders, first responders, and so on, and scene work which has focused primarily on providing technical support for the fire and post-blast investigation of the scene itself. We'll continue to work alongside our long-standing partners, for as long as it takes, to help determine the origin and cause of this incident. And I'd like to add that I cannot overemphasize the importance, as the other speakers have indicated, of the long-standing and effective partnerships that have been in place for a very long time to the effectiveness of the investigation. Thank you.
And next, I'd like to call up our partner with DEP, Virginia Kane, Community Relations Coordinator for the PA Department of Environmental Protection.
Thank you so much. Among our many responsibilities, the DEP stands ready to assist in the event of an emergency with potential environmental impacts. Our emergency responders are ready 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just like we were last Friday. When we arrived on scene, we did have several concerns that we needed to assess. PES was able to fulfill all of our requests as far as ensuring what we needed to learn from them. We no longer have emergency response at site. However, we do still have ongoing communications with our partners in the city, with PES and EPA, and we will continue to make program available for staff visits. At this time, the only outstanding concern from DEP is regarding the regulated storage tanks and other components at the facility that we would like PES to deem structurally sound once the site is secured. DEP will be available to visit the site to oversee those efforts and offer guidance moving forward. We support the position of the air management services, so our air quality program also has no longer outstanding concerns, and neither does our clean water program, as we believe that all of the runoff is going to the treatment plant and not to the river. Thanks.
And finally, we'll have the Managing Director, Brian Abernathy, be available for a statement, and then we'll be available for questions.
Great. Thank you, Noel. This incident has sharpened a number of questions around the refinery. First and most importantly, is the refinery safe? Is it safe for workers, and is it safe for the surrounding community? Does PES have appropriate measures in place to prevent a catastrophic failure? Was our response and was the response of PES adequate and appropriate? What are the environmental and public safety risks around the refinery, specifically around HF? And are we doing enough to mitigate those risks? Should the refinery close, what would be the environmental and public safety concerns? The administration believes that Philadelphia Energy Solutions is a vital part of our business community, but we also recognize the real concerns that this incident raised for near neighbors and for the city as a whole. To that end, we support and look forward to partnering with PES on these important questions, as well as to working with community members to make sure their concerns are addressed. While the working group membership has not been finalized, we expect that PES, the city, environmental experts and scientists, emergency management, the trades, and community members all to be represented. We plan to have an organizing meeting on July 1st, and we'll have a public meeting by the end of July. The investigation into this accident will take months, if not years, to complete. We can't wait that long to provide an answer to our residents, and I'm optimistic that this working group can go a long way to providing those answers into the future. We're happy to take a few questions. Yes, sir.
So, just some technical questions. Is PS voluntarily shut down to our point, or are they under some kind of order from the city not to operate that facility?
They are not under order. They have voluntarily ceased production.
Gotcha. Does the city going to sign off or involved in the decision of whether to restart that plant?
We're in consistent communication with PES. To my knowledge, that they're not at that point yet, and certainly we'll be in communication if and when they get to a decision making.
Do you have any sense of when they would envision that plant to restart at the moment?
At this point, I do not.
The mayor had mentioned that there was certainly room for improvement in terms of the safety standards there. Is anything specific?
That's part of what the working group is going to investigate, is exactly what safety standards were in place and what safety standards should have been in place. We don't know today.
So, as far as you know, that you can say that there aren't any that you knew of or you determined that were not in place.
There's nothing that we know of for certain that was not in place that should.
What assurances can you give the public about hydrofluoric acid on the site? There's been a lot of dire warnings about the consequences of an escape on that. What can you tell us?
Certainly, that's one of the reasons that the fire department has such a large presence on the site, is to make sure that we are monitoring regularly to make sure that HF does not impact the community. Right now, we feel comfortable that the community is safe, but again, that's why we have a package of fire apparatus there, and will continue to be there until the incident is placed under control.
And are you going to be pressing PES to look for an alternative to HF?
I think we need to understand the operations a little bit better before I can say that.
What was the point of rupture? Can you tell us what?
We can't say at this point.
Can you tell us what, I mean, it seems kind of contradictory when people see black smoke coming out of a big fire and then having the, city say, well, there was no impacts to air quality or public health. Can you sort of talk about that? And, there had to be something released. It was a fire. So
Doctor?
how do you answer that question?
Well, one of the things is the prevailing wind blows.
Okay.
So some of the weather patterns actually blew the smoke away from the city. And our monitoring, of course, is not done right at the impact of the fire. I believe the fire department does some monitoring within PES borders, but outside the fence line of that property, there was no detection of any of these byproducts. I think a lot of that had to do with the weather at the time.
So would the wind have blown it, say, to South Jersey, and could there be impacts on people living in South Jersey instead, or anywhere else?
Well, the only thing I can answer about that is there's ongoing air quality monitoring in all states in this country, and some, including in Philadelphia and including in New Jersey. And their air monitor that was in closest proximity did not pick up anything of concern. So I don't want to speak too much for what New Jersey is seeing or not, but my guess is that this has to do with weather patterns.
So, but just to be clear, you're saying there's no impact to the public health here in Philadelphia, for residents of Philadelphia. You're not talking about other places.
I'm the Deputy Health Commissioner for Philadelphia. I can only make a statement about Philadelphia's residents. We've not detected anything of concern that would affect Philadelphia. Doesn't mean I know anything about New Jersey, I just am not.
Yeah, I was just using that as an example.
Right, but they may have their own monitoring system, and you could check with them if they have anything. I do know that we checked with their routine air pollution monitoring, and they've not detected anything.
What was the nature of the
Well,
fire?
let me add one more thing to that. So the primary products that we're burning are actually the same products that you buy to, if you have a gas grill, to cook whatever is on that gas grill. The primary products, liquefied petroleum gas, essentially. So the same thing that you buy once it's packaged, the plant actually produces an additive for gasoline. So that most of what was burning, and you saw in that fire, was actually, it was quite literally fuel intended for consumers. Now, obviously, it was not intended to be burned in that fashion and in that rate. And obviously, we know this from our own experience with other structure fires daily in the city of Philadelphia. There are always releases of different materials. The question for us from a monitoring standpoint, an air monitoring standpoint, is also at what level. So every time you drive a car, you're releasing some level of toxic materials into the atmosphere. It's a relatively small level. So the other part, of course, is the geography. There were absolutely, but you're right, there were absolutely measurable, quantities of that liquefied petroleum gas on the site. That's not the case right now, but when that happened, again, stating the obvious, there were measurable quantities of those materials. So as you move out from the site, obviously that the concentration of those materials changes over time. So again, I think to echo what my colleagues are saying, we still have 5 or 6 different entities all doing air monitoring and air sampling at different points from really right around the unit going out. And we're going to continue to do that for quite some time. Certainly that's one of the reasons why the incident has not been placed under control, because we want to continue those monitoring activities. So this is sort of a check, double check, triple check, and check 3 more times just to be safe. So we are, again, sensitive to these concerns, even for the folks who are doing the investigation. So having a good sense of what those materials are and where they are is a precursor for us of being able to do the investigation the way we need to do it and keep our own folks safe in doing that. So we have a really vested interest in making sure that we understand that, which is why we have so many resources that are devoted to it.
What can you tell us about the nature of the injuries to the 5 people that were hurt? Because that might give us some feeling for what the risk was posed here. Was it chemical? Was it from stumbles and falls? Was it smoke? How were they hurt?
Yeah, we actually, we can't speak to that specifically because that's protected medical information. What we have said and is what happened. None of those folks were transported to the hospital by our emergency medical services units. So there was nobody who had a desire or a need to be transported to hospital from the incident at that time. And again, those folks are private individuals. So what's happened since, couldn't speak to that. But at the point of the incident, when it started, and we saw those folks, some of them were actually treated at the PES's on-site clinic. So.
Commissioner, are your people being given enough access to the site, or is PES closing you out in some way?
No, we have essentially unlimited access to the site. Now I say that, and that all of us are operating according to our monitoring results, according to our understanding of what's going on in the unit right now. And again, that's a puzzle that we're putting together day by day. That's why this is going to take a while. As you imagine right now, some of our concerns are structural. So there are areas where we want to go to the unit, but we don't want to go into those, so they're assessed by a structural engineer. And PES is doing that. They've been very cooperative. So we are on the site as far as we want to go. And again, we can go further and further with every day as we progress, again, down these parallel paths to doing a full and complete investigation. It's going to take, again, as you've heard everybody say, a long time.
No one from PES has answered any questions or appeared publicly since this. Do you wish they would? I mean, have you asked them to speak to the community in person?
Yeah, there's a recognition that PES is going to need to have a public conversation. I think they're still trying to determine exactly what happened, just like we are. For this press conference specifically, we thought it was appropriate that this is about our government response and not about PES's response. But yes, we've had conversations, we've had ongoing conversations, and we will continue to have ongoing conversations. Again, expect PES or the representatives to be a part of the working group as well, and that will include public meetings.
Is the city concerned that the refinery and the refiners' financial problems have been well documented? Are they concerned about how that played a role into this incident and whether they can safely operate given their financial position?
Yes, and that's going to be something that we continue to work through as part of the working group to understand that that economic position, what investments they've made recently into the capital infrastructure of the site, and how they can continue to invest in the site to make sure that it's safe going forward.
Do you know, I mean, Virginia, you mentioned earlier that the DEP is focused on making sure there are certain chemicals that are stored there that are still safe. Can you tell us what those chemicals are, and do you know if in the process of the explosion and the fire, if any of those chemicals were released?
So we're less concerned about the chemicals themselves. We're more talking about the structural integrity of those tanks. So we don't believe that any of the regulated storage tanks were involved in the blast, but they were in the proximity. So we're talking about making sure that nothing was damaged or shifted. Some of the systems like piping maybe are not regulated, so they would be considered unregulated systems. We still want to make sure that we're not back here in any amount of time, so that everything that could have possibly been touched or shifted during the blast is deemed structurally sound.
Can you tell us what those substances are that are regulated there?
It's more about the tanks themselves. So we don't regulate high pressure vessels. So these are the large storage tanks that could have butane or propane in them. So that's what we're talking about, is the tanks themselves and less about the materials that are in them. We regulate the structures.
Or presumably you regulate the structures so there's no release of what's inside.
Correct, no damage. I'm looking, we have an emergency response coordinator. Yeah. Ben can talk a little bit
Okay,
more about the
thank
tanks.
you.
Ben Russell, an emergency response coordinator for DEP Southeast Region. So the materials in the tanks, I mean, it varies greatly. We have a list of dozens of tanks that are regulated on the site. There, you know, it could be cumene, benzene, all sorts of petroleum-based compounds. But like Regina said, the tanks that we regulate are not necessarily based on the product. It's based on how they're stored. You know, non-pressure vessels, we regulate. Pressurized vessels like the HF would be regulated by a different entity, typically the State Department of Labor and Industry.
Thank you. Thank you all. I think we're done.